Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. It was a quiet night in Gotham, the kind of night that rarely came to the city. Batman was perched on the edge of a rooftop, the cold wind tugging at the edges of his cape. The soft hum of the Batcave's communication system vibrated through his cowl, signaling a message coming through. It was from the Justice League. Bruce, the familiar voice of Barry Allen, better known as Flash, echoed in his ear. "We are at a situation in Central City." Batman's eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" "People are not themselves," Flash replied, his voice laced with tension. "They were doing things they wouldn't normally do, like they were being controlled or manipulated somehow. I am pretty sure it's mind control, but it's more advanced than anything I've ever seen." Batman was already moving before Flash had finished. He knew Central City was a breeding ground for meta-criminals, but mind control was a different beast entirely. It required precision, intelligence, and power traits that concerned him far more than brute strength. "I am on my way," Batman said. Cutting off the transmission, he activated the Batmobile remotely, the sleek black vehicle roaring to life a few blocks away. Within moments, he was speeding through Gotham's streets toward the Justice League teleportation point. Flash was waiting when Batman arrived, his usual cocky grin absent. Instead, his face was drawn, eyes haunted by what he had seen. "Glad you're here," Flash said. "It's bad, Bruce. Real bad." "Show me," Batman replied, his voice calm and controlled. No matter the situation, his demeanor remained a steady anchor, even as Flash vibrated with nervous energy. Together, they made their way to the heart of the problem, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Central City. But Batman knew better than to be fooled by appearances. If Flash had called him in, it was because the threat was serious. Inside, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. A handful of civilians stood motionless in the center of the room, their eyes glassy and unfocused. As Batman scanned the area, his sharp gaze fell upon a figure seated in a chair, his head tilted back slightly, eyes closed as if he were in deep concentration. "That trusts him," Flash whispered, pointing at the man. "He calls himself the Architect." Batman's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of a psychic capable of altering minds, bending reality within the confines of the human psyche. But those had only been whispers passed through the criminal underworld like ghost stories now. It seemed those rumors were all too real. "Stay close," Batman said. "We don't know the full extent of his ability." Flash nodded, but before they could move, the man's eyes snapped open. "The Architect said," his voice soft but commanding. Without warning, a wave of psychic energy surged toward them. Batman and Flash tried to react, but it was too late. Their bodies froze in place, and the world around them dissolved into a blinding light. When Batman's vision cleared, he found himself standing in a dark, twisted version of Gotham City. The buildings loomed overhead like towering monsters, their edges jagged and surreal. The sky above was a swirling mass of black clouds, lightning crackling through them intermittently. It was a place he recognized all too well, a distorted manifestation of his worst fear. Bruce's Flash voice echoed from somewhere nearby. "We're not in Central City anymore," Batman muttered, his mind already racing through the possibility. "We were in our minds. The Architect fused us together in a shared mental landscape." "Great," said, his voice shaking slightly. "Just what I needed, a front row seat to the inside of your head." But Batman wasn't listening. He was already analyzing their surroundings, searching for any clue as to how to escape. The Architect had them at a disadvantage, but Batman never believed in being helpless. There was always a way out, always. A figure appeared in the distance, and Batman tensed his instincts, screaming at him to prepare for a fight. But as the figure grew closer, he recognized it. Thomas and Martha Wayne. Flash must have seen them too, because he stopped dead in his tracks. "Bruce, is that?" "They were not real," Batman said coldly, trying to suppress the emotions, threatening to rise to the surface. "This is a manipulation." But as his parents walked toward him, their faces etched with the same peaceful smiles he remembered from his childhood, he could not help the flood of memories that washed over him. Their deaths, the gunshot echoing in the alley, the blood on the pavement, his greatest failure, the moment that had defined his entire existence. "Bruce, Martha," said her voice soft and filled with love. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to keep fighting. Come with the sun," Thomas added. "Let it go. Let the pain go." Batman's fists clenched at his sides. He knew this was a trap, a ploy to weaken his resolve. But it was so hard to resist, so hard to look into the faces of the people he had lost and not want to believe in the illusion. Flash stepped forward, placing a hand on Batman's shoulder. "This isn't you real, Bruce. I know it feels like it, but it's not." "I know," Batman ground out, his voice strained, "but that doesn't make it any easier." Before they could say anything more, the sky above them darkened, and a massive wave of shadows swept across the city. The illusion of Batman's appearance disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by a new nightmare Gotham in flame. Buildings collapsed in on themselves, the streets cracked open, and screams filled the air. Batman's heart raced as he watched the city he had sworn to protect fall into chaos. "This is what you fear the most, isn't it?" The architect's serum voice echoed around them. "Failure, the collapse of everything you've built, everything you've fought for." Batman's jaw tightened. "It's not real," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Flash looked around, panic rising in his chest. "What do we do? How do we stop this?" "We don't have," Batman said. "We endure it. We let the fear wash over us and remind ourselves that it's not real." Flash shook his head, his speedster instincts kicking in. "That's not how I handle things. I run. I get away from it." "That's not an option here," Batman replied. "This is a test. The architect is trying to break us down by exploiting our fear." Just as Batman said the words, the ground beneath them shifted, and they were thrown into the air, tumbling through the abyss. When they landed, they found themselves in a new environment, Flash Central City. Except like Gotham, it wasn't the real Central City. This version was a chaotic blur, everything moving at lightning speed. People zipped past them too fast to see, and the buildings flickered in and out of existence as if they couldn't decide whether to stay or go. Flash, as breath caught in his throat. No. We ran my head now, aren't we?" "Looks that way," Batman replied, his voice steady. "This is your fear, Barry. You need to face it." Flash's lines trembled as he looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. "I can tell I'm not fast enough." Batman raised an eyebrow. "Not fast enough. You were the fastest man alive." Flash shook his head. "Not when it matters, not when I need to be." Before Batman could respond, the world shifted again, and they found themselves standing in front of Flash's childhood home. The door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped out, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mom," Flash whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom," Flash whispered, his voice cracking as he stared at the figure stepping out of the house. Nora Ellen, the woman whose loss had haunted him for most of his life, stood there, looking as real as the last day he'd seen her. Her presence hit him like a freight train, flooding him with memories of a happier time, a time before his life had spiraled into chaos. "Barry," she said, her voice gentle just as he remembered it. "You were so fast, sweetheart. You were doing such great things." Flash took a shaky step forward, his heart pulling him toward her. I tried to save you. I wasn't fast enough. I couldn't." Nora's expression softened, and she reached out to him. "You've always been fast enough, Barry. But sometimes, no matter how fast you are, you can try to change the path." Flash's legs felt like they were made of lead. He wanted to run to escape the pain of seeing his mother like this, knowing she wasn't real, but he couldn't tell. No, not. After all this time, Batman, standing just behind Flash, kept his distance, watching the scene unfold. He knew what this was. The architect was using Flash's deepest wound, just as he had tried to with Batman. But Bruce also knew that Flash had to face this alone. He couldn't be the one to save Barry from his own mind. "You've spent so much of your life running," Nora continued, stepping closer to Flash, her presence warm and comforting. "But what are you running from?" Flash's eyes filled with tears. "I am running from the fact that I couldn't save you, that I couldn't stop him." "Thawne," Nora asked softly, her face becoming more solemn. "You've let him define your fear, but what happened wasn't true. What?" "I should have been there," Flash shouted, his voice breaking. "If I had been faster, if I had been stronger, you would still be alive." Nora reached out and touched his face, and Flash flinched at the sensation. It felt real, too real. "You can save everyone, Barry. No one can." The words hit Flash like a punch to the gut. He had spent his entire life trying to outrun his guilt, his sense of failure. But hearing those words from his mother, even if she wasn't, she real was like a light piercing the darkness that had enveloped him for so long. Flash took a deep breath, his mind racing. I know that now." He glanced back at Batman, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. "You don't have to be fast enough to fix the past," Nora said, her voice fading slightly as if she were beginning to dissolve. "You just have to be fast enough to save the future." With those final words, she disappeared, leaving Flash standing there, his chest heaving with emotion. He wiped his eyes, turning to face Batman. "You were right," Flash said, his voice steadier now. "This is my fear, but it doesn't control me anymore." Batman stepped forward, his face unreadable beneath the cowl. "Then let's finish this." As if on cue, the world around them began to warp, twisting and shifting like a kaleidoscope. The architect's sad voice echoed through the air, filled with rage. "You think you've won? You think facing your fears makes you stronger? I control this world. I control your mind." The ground beneath their feet began to crumble, and the entire landscape dissolved into a chaotic swirl of colors and shape. Batman and Flash stood side by side, bracing themselves against the onslaught of psychic energy. "He's trying to break us," Batman said, his voice calm and measured. "But he doesn't realize that we're stronger together." Flash grinned, a spark of his usual confidence returning. "Let's show him what we then got." Without hesitation, they launched into action. Flash took off in a blur of lightning, his speed creating a vortex of energy that cut through the shifting reality around them. Batman, ever the strategist, focused on analyzing the architect's mental constructs, searching for a weakness. As they fought their way through the collapsing mindscape, the architect's form materialized in front of them, a towering figure, his eyes glowing with psychic power. "You cannot defeat me," the architect roared, his voice booming like thunder. "I'm in your minds. I know every thought, every fear. You are nothing compared to my power." Batman narrowed his eyes. "You may know our fears, but that doesn't give you control over us." Flash zipped around the architect, distracting him with bursts of speed, while Batman moved in close, his mind working at a rapid pace to unravel the psychic bonds holding them in this nightmare. "You were vulnerable here," Batman said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your world, but it's also your prison." The architect's eyes flashed with fury, and he lashed out with a wave of psychic energy, sending Batman and Flash sprawling. But even as they hit the ground, they didn't give up. They had faced their fears, and now they were united in their purpose. Flash was back on his feet in an instant, his lightning crackling through the air as he darted toward the architect. "You think you can control me?" he shouted. "You think you can break me with fear? I've lived with fear my whole life, and it's made me stronger." As Flash distracted the architect, Batman zeroed in on the psychic connection that bound them all together. He could feel the pressure in his mind, the subtle push and pull of the architect's influence. But there was something else there, something the architect hadn't accounted for. The connection wasn't one way. Just as the architect had access to their minds, Batman had access to his. And buried deep within the architect's consciousness was the same thing that had driven his need for control fear. The architect's own mind was fragile, built on layers of insecurity and fear of losing power. Batman seized on that weakness, pushing back with all his mental strength. "You were not invincible," Batman said, his voice cutting through the architect's sense bravado. "You were just as afraid as we are." The architect faltered, his psychic grip loosening for the briefest moment, but that was all Batman needed. Now Batman shouted, and Flash didn't hesitate. He unleashed a burst of speed, lightning arsting around him as he surged toward the architect. With a final thunderous punch, Flash struck the architect in the chest, sending a shockwave through the mindscape. The architect's form shattered, his psychic hold crumbling around the world flickered, and then imploded, dissolving into a sea of light. When Batman and Flash opened their eyes, they were back in the real world, lying on the cold floor of the warehouse. The architect lay unconscious nearby, his body limp and powerless. Batman slowly rose to his feet, his muscles aching from the strain of the psychic battle. Flash groaned, sitting up and rubbing his temples. Man, that was intense. Batman glanced at the architect, ensuring he was truly incapacitated before turning to Flash. "You did well." Flash smiled, though it was tired. "Thanks, you too. I guess facing your fears isn't as bad when you've got someone watching your back." Batman's expression softened slightly. "We make a good team." Flash stood, brushing himself off. "Yeah, we do, though. Next time, let's try to avoid getting trapped in each other's minds." Agreed. As they stepped outside the warehouse, the first rays of dawn were breaking over Central City, casting the streets in a soft, golden light. The city was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just endured. Flash looked at Batman, his usual cocky grin starting to return. "So what now, you heading back to Gotham?" Batman nodded. "There's always work to be done." Flash hesitated for a moment, then added, "Bruce, we don't talk much. But after what we went through back there, I get it now. Why you do what you do." Batman didn't respond immediately, but when he finally spoke, there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "It's not easy, but it helps to know I am not doing it alone." Flash's grin widened. "Well, anytime you need a partner in crime fighting, you know where to find me." With that, Flash sped off in a blur of red lightning, leaving Batman standing alone in the quiet dawn. For a moment, he stood there, watching the city come to life before turning and heading toward the Batmobile. As he drove away, his mind drifted back to the maze they had just escaped. The architect had tried to break them to exploit their fears and insecurity, but instead he had only strengthened the bond between them. And for the first time in a long while, Batman allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope.